Welcome to this presentation on Commercial Negotiation, Level 4, Module 5. This presentation has been developed to give students exam support with tips to pass your Level 4 exam. The presentation is sponsored by the Negotiating Compass, the complete guide to negotiation, available from the Negotiating Compass website and selected bookshops. The exam is based around a guide which consists of 3 chapters. Each chapter considers a specific area of commercial negotiations conducted with external organisations. We will look at each of these chapters in turn. The guide starts in Chapter 1 by linking negotiation to the procurement and supply cycle. Students should be familiar with the cycle from previous modules. However, for this module, you need to relate the activities around negotiation to the cycle itself. A simple way to do this is to remember keywords associated with the 13 stages. In this example, we've reduced the words down to a bare minimum. Stage 1 is internal negotiation and specification, Stage 2 is bargaining power, Stage 3 is objectives, and so on. Make a list of the stages and the associated words for your revision. The Negotiation Compass is the complete guide to negotiation and includes lots of information regarding power, objectives and conditioning. It also takes you through the negotiating cycle, which includes opening the negotiation and making concessions. The guide goes on to link the negotiation to the contract cycle. Once again, we have linked keywords to the 12 stages of the cycle, starting with scope. By learning the keywords, you will remember what activity is associated with each stage of the cycle and be able to answer questions related to it. You should once again make a list of the stages and words for revision. The guide continues by examining conflict in negotiation. It gives you 2 sources of divergent positions. The first is content. A simple reminder for content is to start by remembering the 5 rights of procurement you learned in previous modules. Quantity represents volumes, which are mentioned in the guide. Then simply replace time with terms and you'll have the majority of the content covered. With regards to process, the 7 areas can be covered by relating them to 3 points: agenda, people and place. People have different styles and cultures and may be made up of different teams. The location, medium and timing all come under the same heading. The Thomas Kilmann model is used within the guide and students should familiarise themselves with the model itself. Some students have a graphic memory and can picture the matrix. Another way to remember the model is to use the first letters of the different styles: comp, col, comp, and AV and AC. The Negotiating Compass covers conflict within its chapters and explains how to recognise and deal with divergent positions efficiently and effectively. This includes applying the dagger method to solve problems and reduce friction. The guide goes on to talk about stakeholder mapping. Once again, some students may feel confident remembering the graphic. For others, the tip is to remember EI and BI, which form the letters of the upper and lower sections of the matrix: engage, involve, and build, inform. The guide then moves on to team roles and mentions there are 6 main actors that may be employed: team leader, chief negotiator, commercial lead, technical lead, observer and scribe. A useful way to remember these roles is to create a mnemonic. In this case, the crazy comedian tells obvious stories. This is supported by a mental image. Here we have a comedy set of glasses with a moustache, and this helps you to remember the mnemonic from the graphic. Why are mnemonics so important? Because for this exam you are using a particular part of your brain linked to memory. In constructed response exams, you are using your frontal lobe to solve problems. It's not so much about remembering the word, it's about finding a solution. The words you use are not as relevant, but you still have to remember key models and statements. For objective response exams, such as commercial negotiation, you're required to memorize words and facts. You do not have to apply them, just to remember them. So the key here is to burn the information into your memory. One of the ways we can do this is through mnemonics. Let's see how this works in practice. Here is a typical objective response question. Immediately we can see that this is related to memory. Which one applies? You may already know the answer. Or we could apply the mnemonic. It would take you seconds to remember the mnemonic, and immediately the answer would spring to mind, giving you more time to concentrate on the other questions. Efficient and effective. The negotiation compass also talks about team roles and identifies 4 key actors in a negotiation: leader, observer, scribe and tracker. You may find yourself having to cover all these roles in a negotiation. More information on these roles can be found in the book. The guide then goes on to describe the different types of approaches to negotiations and focuses on 2 angles: distributive and integrative. To remember the 2 different approaches, keep in mind that distributive is distant and integrative is close. This way you remember how the 2 types of relationship would develop in a normal encounter. If we are distant with people, we tend not to build up trust or develop relationships. The opposite is also true. As we build relationships, we build value add. In other words, we make a bigger pie. Another useful tool here are mind maps. A mind map is a diagram used to visually organize information into a hierarchy, showing relationships among pieces of the whole. You can build a linear mind map as the one shown, or build one with the word in the center and spread out. Once again, we're trying to burn information into your memory, not solve problems. In this case, the word distributive makes us think of the word distant. If we are distant, the negotiation will not be based on trust, but probably price, and the relationship won't be important. How do they work in practice? Once again, we have a typical objective response question. We need to remember the situation in a distributive negotiation. You may already know the answer. But if not, let's apply our mind map and go backwards. In your memory, you will have seen the issue of trust highlighted in your map. This leads us back to the fact that the relationship is distant and therefore distributive. The answer is B. The guide focuses on the 2 extremes of negotiation, distributive and integrative. But in the negotiating compass, we delve into the more realistic fact that most negotiations take place between these 2 extremes. The book covers areas including apportioned and blended negotiations. The zone of possible agreement, or ZOPA, is the range in a negotiation in which 2 or more parties can find common ground. According to the guide, the negotiating parties can work towards a potential agreement that incorporates at least some of the other's objectives. Students should not consider ZOPA in isolation, as it's indelibly linked to BATNA and MIL. Once the zone has been established, the negotiator will need to identify possible best alternatives if there is no agreement within it. Meanwhile, they should also plan what they can accept within the zone in terms of what they must achieve, intend to achieve, and would like to achieve. The negotiating compass goes beyond these 3 criteria to discuss other strategies not covered in the guide. These include a complete alternative in a market of perfect competition and a walk-away strategy where there are no best alternatives. The guide goes on to describe the different types of power that can be used in negotiation. These include reward, coercive, expert, informational, referent, and legitimate. Once again, we will use a mnemonic to remember the different types. Using this particular mnemonic should bring to mind racing legends, which automatically remind you of the last 2 types. With regard to commercial aspects, the student should be familiar with a number of the models used. However, the slant towards negotiation needs to be applied. How do the forces affect power in the negotiations? How important is spend and risk in achieving an agreement? And what are the risks? How does the supplier preferencing model impact on the supplier's willingness to make a deal? The negotiating compass also covers these models, but delves deeper into the commercial aspects by considering models used to establish the importance of downstream exposure and supplier strategies based on their portfolio. The relationship spectrum in the guide can be consolidated under three headings: time in terms of length of contract or relationship, resource in terms of effort to establish the costs and price analysis, and trust linked to more regular meetings in closer relationships. The negotiating compass covers a wide range of considerations when conducting negotiations and sees the range as a continuum whereby relationships can be developed towards closer, more harmonious agreements. We now move on to Chapter 2. In this chapter, the guide starts to look at the mechanics of the negotiation in terms of understanding costs and volumes. It progresses to look at economic factors that impact on the negotiation and begins to think about how value can be added through the introduction of tradable assets. The guide then considers location and type of meeting. With regards to cost, the student needs to keep in mind that there are two types linked to production or manufacturing: direct costs, which are directly associated with the product being made, and indirect costs, which supports the production of the product indirectly. Any activity will have an effect on both costs. If you're not involved in manufacturing, you may find this concept a little confusing. Let's use a domestic example as a simple comparison. A family is making a pizza in the kitchen. The pizza consists of dough, pepperoni, cheese and tomato paste. These are all direct costs in the form of direct materials. The family making the pie are also direct costs in the form of direct labour. One of the family is responsible for ordering the ingredients online. They are not involved in production and represent indirect costs in the form of indirect labour. Students should familiarise themselves with terms related to cost and price. Let's use our comparison again. Absorption costs is where overheads such as the energy for gas for the oven are blended into the total costs. Marginal costs can be applied to every single new unit. For example, the family could produce another pizza. Cost can be allocated according to activity. For example, the cost of kneading the dough would be separate to the cost of baking it. Cost plus will be where an extra ingredient is added and the extra cost included. Total cost of ownership would be cradle to grave. Imagine a house being built, the oven being installed, the family moving in and making the pizza, retiring and selling the house. Now imagine the family want to sell the pizzas. They add up their costs, which ensures that the full cost of creating the pizza is covered, allowing a markup to ensure a positive rate of return. Alternatively, they sell the pizza on the basis that it's made with premium ingredients and charge a higher premium price. Their strategy may be to try and gain market share, in which case they sell at a low price to penetrate the market. They may choose to add profit marginally based on the increase in units, or they may simply look at the price of other similar pizzas and price accordingly. The guide also discusses elasticity of demand and elasticity of supply. If either of these are said to be elastic, it means they will stretch or move when pulled in a certain direction, just like an elastic band. If they do not move, they are said to be inelastic, just like a knot of bands, making it harder to stretch. An elastic product is defined as one where a change in price leads to a significant shift in demand, and where substitutes are available for an item, the more elastic the product will be. If the prices go down, people buy more. Elasticity of supply is a measure of a producer's ability to cope effectively with changes in demand. If a producer sees prices rising to meet demand, they will produce more. Let's go back to our simple comparison. The law of supply states that when the market price of a good increases, suppliers will increase the supply of that good, and when the price decreases, the quantity they will supply decreases. Our family has seen that demand for their pizzas has risen. As they make £1 profit on every pizza, they decide to sell more to gain extra revenue. This is because the supply of pizza is elastic. The law of demand states that the price of a good and the quantity demanded have an inverse relationship. When the price of a good rises, there will be less demand for that good, and conversely, when the price decreases, there will be more demand for that good. The family needs more ingredients for the pizzas. Because they're paying for bulk amounts, they get a discount. The change in price allows them to buy more. This is because the demand of ingredients is elastic. In the guide, the student is introduced to the macro and micro environments. You may remember these from other modules. This includes the analytical tools that can be used, such as PESTLE and SWOT. Once again, the student must consider this from a negotiation angle. What activities are taking place that may impact on the negotiation? These may include political changes or economic activities such as a recession. What's the consequence? Does it strengthen the argument for negotiation or weaken it? Is it an opportunity that can be used to add value? The negotiation uses similar models in its analysis of the micro and macro environment. However, the book has made the addition of media to the macro analysis, as this now has such an impact on negotiations, and uses Temple's analysis. The guide describes the bargaining mix as all the issues in a project. This is described in the negotiating compass as part of the overall zone of potential agreement, remembering that price is not the only tradable. This could include other areas for exchange, such as higher volumes or early delivery. Position and interests are also important. Often what a person says they want does not relay what they actually need. This is often described through the analogy of an orange. Two chefs require an orange for their recipe. There is only one orange, so they decide to split it and have one half each. What they don't realise is the want of an orange is their position. Their needs are quite different. One chef needs the peel and the other chef needs the flesh. They could have both had a full orange if they had discovered their interests. The guide goes on to describe the bargaining of tradables, the mix of variables that can be traded, as we explained earlier within the ZOPA. The more variables that can be exchanged through give and take, the more movement or value add can be introduced from the negotiation. The negotiating compass uses the analogy of a wall when developing variables. If price is the only variable and it will not move, you cannot move the wall. But if more bricks are added, in other words more variables such as discounts or training, the wall can be moved brick by brick. The negotiating compass includes the Newman list, which provides over 30 different variables that could be used within a negotiation. The guide provides information on where the negotiation could be held. The student can collate these areas under 5 headings. What do you want to see? Is it important to visit the supplier? What do you want them to see? Do they need to observe something? What sort of atmosphere do you want to project? Relaxed? Official? What are the logistics involved? Does it require international travel? And who has the capacity to conduct the negotiation? Maybe you need an outside venue. The negotiating compass goes into detail on several areas related to location, including home, away, neutral venues, and also issues related to virtual negotiations and international considerations. The guide identifies 5 team roles which differ from those used in previous chapters. Students should be aware of which learning criteria they are covering if they see a question on team roles. If the question relates to 2.4, there are only 5 roles. Once again, we can use a mnemonic to remember them. Finally, we move on to Chapter 3. This chapter focuses on the process of negotiation and the skills used to achieve outcomes. The student will be expected to know the stages of negotiation. Once again, we can use a mnemonic to remember each stage: preparation, opening, testing, proposing, bargaining, agreement, and closure. Mind maps can be used to expand on each stage. Some students believe that there is an element of problem solving in the exam because they often include narrative questions. These are questions with a storyline to keep the reader interested. However, this belief has no foundation. The question is still constructed to test your memory. The narrative is superfluous. If the student focuses directly on the action conducted and then considers the options, they can answer the question based on memory. In this example, the question is merely asking when a certain type of question should be used and gives 4 stages to choose from. The time involved and the price reduction are irrelevant. The negotiating compass describes the negotiation process as a cycle with 8 stages. It does not end but continues as the negotiator develops skills and knowledge from previous negotiations and applies them to new ones. As we described earlier, the stages can be remembered as a mnemonic. They then need to be fleshed out by building mind maps. Preparation needs market analysis. Market analysis looks at buyer and supplier power, entry, and alternatives. The opening requires confirmation of understanding. This can be achieved through an agenda, authority checks, and using a warm approach. Testing requires a negotiator to check assumptions. This can be achieved through the use of open questions such as who, how, what, where, and why. Proposing needs to create movement. This can be achieved through developing options, finding common ground, and asking what-if questions. Bargaining requires tradables. Remember to trade high for low, link issues such as price and volume, and build a wall of tradables as explained in the negotiating compass. Agreement requires confirmation. Look for closing signs, summarise to make sure everything has been covered, and make sure the agreement is authorised. Finally, closure requires the correct documentation. These may include terms and conditions, timescales, and sign-offs. The guide provides the student with a number of common tactics and ploys, some of which are memorable simply because of their name, such as good cop, bad cop. The negotiating compass provides a list of over 40 tactics and ploys in alphabetical order. The guide provides details on the types of question that can be used. These should be linked to the behaviour you are demonstrating in the negotiation. When testing, you are trying to get information. Use open questions. When proposing, you are exploring possibilities. Use probing questions. When bargaining, you're attempting to trade variables. Use hypothetical questions to see what is exchangeable. When coming to agreement, you need confirmation. Use closed questions. The chapter continues with ways to improve your listening skills. Once again, we can use a mnemonic to remember the 9 ways mentioned in the guide. Non-verbal communication can be remembered by identifying the initial letters of the actions: 3 P's, 2 E's, and 2 V's. The negotiating compass covers question techniques, body clusters, active listening, and more in its chapters on the negotiating cycle and negotiating skills. The guide uses Hofstede's cultural dimensions to describe cultural issues related to negotiation. In 1965, Hofstede founded the Personal Research Department of IBM Europe. Between 1967 and 1973, he executed a large survey study regarding national value differences across IBM's worldwide subsidiaries. It is still in use today. Students can use a mnemonic to remember them or simply recall them with the word Pilumi. The negotiating compass uses a separate model called Pertl analysis based purely on cultural issues that will impact negotiations and not related to corporate national values. Finally, the guide looks at reflection. The student merely needs to remember 3 words related to process, people and objectives. What did you do? What was the outcome? And were the objectives met? Finally, lessons learned. And hopefully this video has allowed you to learn a lot. Good luck with your exam. This presentation has been sponsored by the Negotiating Compass, the complete guide to negotiation, available from the Negotiating Compass website and selected bookshops. The Negotiating Compass covers many of the areas discussed here and much more. If you'd like to purchase the Negotiating Compass or look inside, please visit our website. You can also find more videos on our YouTube channel or read our blogs. The book is available for purchase online, or you may wish to attend our negotiating courses, which include a copy of the book. This has been a presentation on Commercial Negotiation, Level 4, Module 5. Thank you for your time.